So we'll be talking to Alia about that today as well, and where Voices for Freedom are going to go this year. They will have had over the Christmas period to recharge. They've already put out something that they consider to be pretty important that has been ignored by mainstream media. We aren't mainstream media. We do take all points of view on board on the show and allow them to have a say. And therefore, while Voices for Freedom might be banned on other media forum in this country, they're certainly not banned here. Joining us is the co-founder of Voices for Freedom, Alia Bland. Happy New Year to you, and I hope you had a good Christmas, Alia.
Hey, thanks, Michael. Happy New Year to you too. Yeah, we've had a good Christmas apart from all the rain up here in Auckland.
Yeah, Wayne Brown was just talking about that as well. Have you had is summer just arriving now?
It feels like that, yeah. It's definitely getting a little bit warmer to the point where I went for a swim yesterday, which was nice. So here's hoping it stays that way and the grass sort of stops bolting like it is at the moment.
I always, just before I carry on with Voice for Freedom, but just on that, whenever I go to Auckland over summer, it's always incredibly humid. Have you had that humidity here a year, or has it been a bit cooler?
It's horrible, yeah. No, I think I'd probably actually prefer to be down your way, Michael, at the moment.
Yeah, I was just saying, we've had, since Christmas, we've had 7 days over 30 here. And I was just, the irony is that Sydney must be having the same sort of weather you are, because they haven't had 1 day over 30 in Sydney, and you'd expect Sydney to be as hot as hot. But there you go.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on. Voices for Freedom had a big year last year.
Yeah.
You ended up as public enemy number one, I think, with certain media in this country, particularly with Stuff and probably Radio New Zealand. They would be the two that really went for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I see they haven't stopped yet.
No.
When you look back, first of all, on 2022, is there anything you might have done different?
Well, that's a good question. Gosh, I really don't. I'm not sure that there is. You're right. 2022 was an incredibly busy year. We all came into the year, the start of that year. I said, we commando rolled into the year from the previous sort of chaos from the last portion of 2021 with all the mandates. Claire and I were working kind of easily up over 100 hours a week to help people to deal with their situations with employment and so forth. And so, we did start the year without really having any rest. So if there was anything that I would change would have been having a rest before going into it so that we weren't so exhausted. And it really didn't let up all year long. I mean, obviously the parliamentary protest happened and we got heavily involved in that. And then just over the year, just sort of more of the same, responding to all of the nonsense that has been happening from the government, which seems to be pretty relentless.
Going back, though, to the protest last year, which sort of became a defining moment, you were involved with Voices for Freedom early on in that piece when it seemed to have a fair bit of sympathetic support from folk in the country. We all know how it ended in the most unfortunate circumstances. We closed the door on that, do you think, on the 31st of December, or do the consequences of that protest linger to this day?
I think whoever was involved in that protest down there, whether they actually were on the ground or just supporting from afar, will carry that with them for the rest of their lives. I know I will. What happened down there for anyone who was present was utterly heartbreaking. The way that the police turned on everybody at the end. And I know that there's kind of two different ways of looking at that. But it really was truly awful, and that we were trying with all our might to get the audience with the government to make some change. And our head of legal and I have had a meeting with the Independent Police Conduct Authority at the end of last year, a long meeting, and, just reiterating to them the sort of measures that we were taking to try and resolve things. We had one of the top mediators in the country who was prepared to work pro bono to, sit down with government representatives and representatives from the main groups at the convoy. And that was pretty much ignored. And, we had several meetings with the Human Rights Commission. We were taking it really seriously down there. And, of course, the mainstream media kind of tried to portray it as this chaotic sort of group of people who didn't know what they wanted or where they were going, or they were just rebel-rousers. Or, like it was, they of course, they didn't want to look. And they knew, because we were sending them all this kind of information every day. That's what we were working on, was press releases and things like that. It's hard when you look back to sort of see how it was portrayed, because it's so different from the reality.
The other thing, I guess, I'm interested. You went to the Independent Police Complaints Authority. Did anything come out of that, or is there still further to go?
That's ongoing, and I think we will be having some more meetings with them. They were actually really good. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was a couple of hours long meeting, and they seemed really interested and curious of our perspectives and unaware of a lot of the things that had happened. So, certain communications between the police wasn't complete, what they had for their records. And just, to hear how our team had worked with the police down there to try as much as possible to, keep a lid on things, to try and keep things calm as can be, because it was a very volatile situation. You're dealing with a lot of emotional people. I hope, it's hard these days to have a lot of faith that any of these processes will actually go in the way that they should, but I hope that something comes out of this and there's some learning for the future so that it never happens again.
Oh, I think we all hope that. Moving on, though, for this year, at the end of last year, as we know, there were the local body election campaigns. You encouraged people to stand for, if they were interested in representing their community. That's fine. There's also the conservation boards, I think, that are currently, we've talked about this before, and you've encouraged people who might belong to your organisation to stand again to represent their communities on the conservation board. That has attracted, as we know, some adverse comment from the media organisations I've discussed already.
Yes.
Do you expect that whenever now somebody who has an affiliation or association with Voices for Freedom does stand for any publicly elected office, they will be subject to this kind of scrutiny?
I would expect nothing less in the mainstream media at the moment, which is why I would imagine in the case of the Department of Conservation board positions, that will probably attract people who have kept more of a clean, inverted commas, profile, publicly, whether it be on their social media, because those positions are appointed, not elected.
But I guess the question that I would have then is that, I guess the next question would be, have you tried to talk to any of those, like, for example, Stuff and Radio New Zealand News, and said, can we have a chat because we don't think your coverage is fair?
We ask, when they get in touch with us, we generally ask that they put their questions in writing, and often we do send back more information in terms of other kind of issues that we would like them to better understand. There's just such a terrible breakdown in trust there that we don't trust at all that any conversation that we had with them would be conveyed honestly. So in the past, I have tried to reach out to individual journalists, and that has, it's never really gone well. So, there's one sort of particular incident that I'm thinking of where I alerted them to a new scientific finding, and of course they rallied around the experts to put us down and to say, to compare us to sort of year 13 science students that we weren't up to scratch, even though we were working with scientists and doctors to put the stuff together, and over the course of time we were proven to be right and they were wrong. So, I don't know. It's not that I would never. And I've sort of said, I wouldn't actually mind sitting down with the likes of Kate Hanna and having a conversation, because I think that if we did that, they would sort of see that we're just everyday Kiwis who are interested in the future of our country.
Okay. Now, thinking ahead for this year, there was we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but there was an immediate, you put out an email to your email list group, I think on Monday or Tuesday of this week. Was it Monday? Was it? And in it, you said
Tuesday.
That you have, or one of your associates has got access to, under the Official Information Act, or to cabinet papers relating to the vaccine being made available. And I think the general allegation was that although public health experts were saying one thing to cabinet, public health spokespeople were saying another to the public. Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was. So it was this whole concept of, there's a committee or a group called the Coronavirus CVTAG is what it's called, Technical Advisory Group. And they are made up of a bunch of different people, and some of the names you would know. I think it's Dr. Ian Town as the chair, along with Helen Petousis-Harris, and I think Nikki Turner is in there, as well as maybe 6 or 7 others. And their job was to provide advice to the government regarding the things to do with the vaccine, like scheduling and dosing and that kind of thing. And so what these, if I go back, the guy publishes under the name of Cranmer, he has a Substack channel. You can find his blogs. We've reposted them on our website, so voicesforfreedom.co.nz. And he is a lawyer who's been writing on various topics, largely 3 waters from what I can see. And he's published this 2-part series of articles because they were quite long, to do with COVID and our Kiwi kids, they were called, so part 1 and part 2. And it was relating to the New Zealand government and the advice from this technical advisory group, the CVTAG. And so he was looking at the documented evidence that had been given, the advice from the CVTAG to the government, that was particularly about the suitability of the COVID injectable for children and youth. This was at a time when, prior to all of this being rolled out to that age group, and the potential harm that had been identified from myocarditis, and alongside with that, the appropriate kind of dosing schedules and the intervals that they could deviate from the manufacturer's advice. From 3-week dosing intervals, they had identified that if you extended that dosing interval between the first and second dose, you minimised the risk of myocarditis.
Yeah. And as I understand, they'd also, as I understand, Alia, looked overseas at countries that were further advanced than ourselves, Israel and the United States, I think, in terms of research, of vaccine rollout. So they had those sorts of figures available and statistics available to them too, yeah?
Yeah, and that was something that's been important all the way along. New Zealand was like the little red caboose on all of this. So, all we needed to do with a lot of things was just look overseas, because we were a good sort of 6 months behind the rest of the world in terms of our rollout. So that gave us the advantage of looking overseas to see what was happening there. It seemed pretty sensible to do that. And while this advisory group might have been doing that, it didn't seem like anyone else really was. So, yes, they had looked at what I think it was the United Kingdom, the JCVI there, which is their similar kind of, I guess, MedSafe, or one of these kind of committees that is responsible for making the recommendations. They had been quite explicit in saying that they had identified this risk, and that they had weighed it up against the low risk of COVID for that age group, and that as far as they could see, that the risks outweighed the benefits. And so they were pretty clear about that on their official information that they had put out. And it was the same apparently in Canada and also Australia. So when our government went ahead and approved it for every child between 12 and 15 years, that was deviating from what the other countries that we would normally be in alignment with were doing. And that was also not what the CVTAG group was recommending. They were saying that, and this took them a couple of months of meeting, you could see through the records that he has provided in his articles, that this is something that they'd been talking about for at least a couple of months, the suitability and their concerns about the risk. And so their advice initially was that they thought that only the most at-risk children in that age group should be made available, the vaccine to them, but in no way would it be, any kind of mandated or anything like that. And then something happened, and this is where it comes into your opinion on things. But they did this 180 turnaround, and a memo came out that was just 2 sentences long that basically said, oh gosh, I've written it down somewhere, but it was, they were saying that they've had a meeting over email. It was an urgent sort of a meeting to discuss the rollout to different groups in the country, and that they had agreed that they thought that it should be rolled out to all children. And that was totally against everything else that they had said. It felt like that was 3 days before a cabinet meeting to discuss this. It felt like that, it looks on the surface that they've been pressured into that position. And so that's one of the issues in there. And another issue that was in there was to do with the dosing intervals. So they had suggested that it would be good to minimise the risk for that age group by extending it from 3 weeks to at least 8 weeks, And overseas, some countries were even doing 12 weeks. And what was coming out was that not only reduced the risk of myocarditis, but apparently it also increased the efficacy. So, it wasn't a bad idea to do that.
I understand what you're saying. So, in essence, they wanted to. What was the rationale for doing it so quickly from the first vaccine to the second? What was the rationale that was provided?
I don't think that there was any that was provided. It was just that that was what Pfizer recommended, and that's what had been tested, I suppose, in the trials. And so I guess, that's just like drugs, any drugs, that's, they have a dosing kind of recommendation. But we're not talking about a normal drug that's been through years and years and years of research. We're talking about something that was rushed through. And so as a result of that, you have to look at what happened in the wake of the rollout and make adjustments. But when you're in the middle of a frenzy where the government was pretty keen to get the jab into every arm of every person in the country, extending the dosing interval, especially when you're trying to run a mandate program with a vaccine passport, which only kicks in when you've had your second one, can you imagine the chaos that would have happened if it had been 2 months apart? You would have had people who would have been really angry about not having the access to their vaccine passport because of this extended duration.
I see. So the vaccine.
That's my take on it.
You're thinking that So if I've only got one dose, I can't get my vaccine passport, but if I get 2, then I can get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I think there's probably multiple reasons.
Yeah, and I'm now also thinking why that might be too, because if what the politicians would be thinking would be, you get your vaccine passport after 1, where's the incentive to get the second? So that's why they would have said you've got to have both before you get your vaccine passport, yeah?
Oh, well, I would imagine so. I mean, they seem to pluck kind of things out of the air as far as I can see.
That makes logical public policy sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. But they decided to go with extending the duration between the intervals to 6 weeks, which was based on no evidence at all. But their messaging to the public was that it was based on evidence from this group, you see, and that was not true. The group had not said that. And so you've got the likes of Bloomfield and Hipkins and McElnay getting up on the podium of truth. And I think we go back to the beginning where, the public was told by Jacinda famously that they were the single source of truth and that we should, follow what they had to say, and that these people that were on the daily kind of 1 o'clock briefings, they were the ones to follow their advice.
Yep.
We were also told that the government was being led by the scientific evidence and expert advice from their panels. I don't know what we're meant to do with it when it becomes clear by their own documents that they've lied.
Okay.
And that is what really it gets on my nerves, to say the least.
Understandably so.
The mainstream media has completely ignored it.
Yeah, no, I picked it up, I think, yesterday or the day beforehand, and you're right. I haven't seen one mainstream media story on this at all. Have you brought it to the attention of the mainstream media, though? I guess you have, just by simply putting it in your newsletter. Is that right?
Well, we know that they watch our stuff, and we know that our, supporters who have messaged us back to say that they have sent it on to various media outlets as well as MPs and things like that. They will know.
Okay.
They will know.
Well, there's the next question for me. If I was a national opposition MP at the moment, without suggesting for one moment that I was anti-vaccination in terms of my sensibilities, I could pick up that piece of information, do a bit more work, and have a real go, couldn't I, at the government and over...
I can't believe why they haven't.
No, see, I don't get that either. And the second part of this is, because the next place for you, obviously, and anybody else to take this, is to this inquiry, the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the lessons learned in regards to do with COVID-19, except it specifically excludes vaccine efficacy, but it doesn't exclude what you're telling the public about the vaccine, does it?
I'm not sure. I would have to look at the finer details of that, but to be honest, I don't trust that investigation at all, that it will really do anything. It won't really look at things critically.
No,
put it that way, I don't believe.
Listen, I share your concern over that, because I have said that the inquiry's scope is sufficiently narrow to try and get people out of a whole series of pokies, and obviously one of them is vaccine efficacy. But I'm looking right now at the exceptions. There are about a dozen, Alia, and there isn't anything here that excludes what you've just talked about. So there was one bullet point: particular clinical decisions made by clinicians or public health authorities. Would that be a clinical decision?
It feels like it is.
It could be.
It's made by
it could be.
a politician rather than the public health brigade. And
the other one is vaccine efficacy. So, was the vaccine effective or not? Which seems odd, because that would seem to be the first question you ask in lots of ways. Did it do what it was, said it was going to do, and what lessons do we learn from that? Next question. Are you going to prepare evidence for the inquiry?
I'd have to talk about that with the others. We've got a lot on our plate that we need to focus on this year, and I'm not sure. We have to be careful where we put our energy, and that it's not wasted on things that aren't going to really bear any fruit. But we'll see. It's not something that's been top of our kind of list at this point. Although, we do provide submission templates and things for people, our supporters, and we also submit our own submissions on a whole lot of things, all the different laws and bills and things that are set to be looked at and passed. So it's not out of the question.
Is that something that, I don't know, have you ever in the past made submissions to pieces of legislation at an official capacity, like you've gone in front of a parliamentary select committee or anything like that?
Yeah, we have. Yeah. Both Claire and our head of legal, Katie, have made submissions, usually over Zoom, to different panels, as well as the written stuff. Yep.
All right. Now, next question. What are you going to do this year? So what is the main thrust of what Voices for Freedom will be concentrating on in 2023?
Oh, we've got a lot of things to do this year, so we're going to have to stay focused. This year has started off with a bang, in that there is already just, a lot of things that are demanding our attention. So first off the bat is probably going to be a submission and information on the therapeutic products bill that people are quite concerned about. That's one that's up there. There's
explain that
also
to me. The therapeutic products bill, as I understand, is trying to bring a series of what would known as natural health remedies into the same criteria as any other, food, drugs, or food and drugs?
That's what it seems like, yes. And I have to admit that I haven't read the actual bill yet, so I can't be still clear on that, but from what I understand, yes, it brings a whole lot of ingredients and compounds and things under the same umbrella as the pharmaceutical drugs, and that can be a problem as to how they are tested and advertised and all of that sort of thing. It sounds like it's something that will drive up the costs of being able to manufacture and market those kind of products, and also has the potential to limit the availability of certain products as well. Something that has been flagged to me that is of concern is that these decisions can be made by an independent or regulator, and the lists of these things which have been previously published in years gone by when they have tried to get this through previously, that list has not been included, and so the list sort of comes afterwards, if you see what I mean. So we don't even know what the
I
list
see.
of
So
things
there'll
are
be an
that they're looking
appendix.
at.
Yeah, so there'll be an index or an appendix of goods. I guess that will change all the time because you simply add to it, will there, though?
Possibly, yes, but I think in the past that list has included some things that most people would find
okay,
interesting.
that's I think it's before select committee at the moment, that particular bill.
Yes.
Yeah.
So submissions, I think, close mid-February on that. So we're working towards, information for that.
Sure.
There's also the WHO's international health regulations. There's some amendments being made to that, and that makes them binding by the sounds of things. So New Zealand is a signatory to that, the IHR, and essentially, from what I can understand, is that the changes make it so that we essentially can lose our sovereignty, and that this kind of globalised, unelected organisation gets to make decisions that impact our country around things like what we've just experienced in New Zealand with issues of public
What sort of
health
things do you think? I mean, what sort of issues are you thinking there in particular?
I think it's to do with the sorts of therapies that are used and the reporting systems. I would have to look again. I did listen to an interview on it the other day, but I'm blanking on the exact.
That's all right. I can help you. I think we signed the international health regulations. About 2004, 2005. For some strange reason, I remember that. And the idea is that it's meant to be some sort of international cooperation where you basically have duties to report, detect, notify public health events to the World Health Organization. Obviously, China did a bloody good job of that. And my understanding is that they're regarded now as out of date. So, yeah, that's what's being advised. Yeah? Yes,
and maybe some of it's okay, but there's other parts of it that are concerning to people that we have been in touch with.
Yeah,
and so it's just the thing that, you've got to keep your eyes on the ball so that you're not finding yourself in a situation where, you've lost your control over your own country.
Mm-hmm.
And, pandemics and what gets...
But if there is an international pandemic, just testing on that one, if there is an international pandemic like COVID, for example, do you think that the World Health Organization should mandatorily informed of the extent of that pandemic in each of those countries and reporting to them so that it can share?
Yeah, I don't think that that's an issue. I think it's more the classification of what qualifies as a public health emergency of international concern, and if it's perceived to be that way rather than necessarily evidence of it. There's those kind of details that you want to make sure that are correct.
Yep. Okay. Fair enough. Yep. And,
all right.
Okay. So that's those two things. Moving on.
We are conscious of the fact that central bank digital currencies are being talked about around the world, including here in New Zealand. CBDCs is what they're commonly known as. And there was an issue with Westpac Bank just after Christmas, I think it was, where people's bank accounts, there was a delay in processing their money, and it left a whole lot of people out of pocket. And, it's just indicative of what happens if we go to a digital system for our currency.
You are of the view, I think Voices for Freedom that there is some dastardly plot underway to get rid of cash in total. Is that right?
Well, I don't know that it's any kind of conspiracy theory. If you look overseas and you look in our own kind of the documentation here, it's just it is just something that is happening around the world. People are moving towards this digital currency. Cash is getting harder to get in some places. You know, there's restrictions on what you can take out of EFTPOS machines and the like. Of course, any of these sorts of things will not be done hard and fast overnight. That will be a gradual thing. But what we're saying is that phasing out of cash is a dangerous path to go, because there's all sorts of reasons why you might not want to do that, because you become kind of tracked on all of your spending. And what we've seen overseas already playing out is in the likes of Canada with the trucker protest, is that people's bank accounts were, suspended because they had made a donation, a $10 donation from Mary down the road to support the truckers, got them in a situation where they couldn't access their funds. And I think when you give all of that control to a centralised body like the government, where could it take us?
Okay.
And you just need to really look at places like China to see where that could take us.
Sorry, what's the Chinese experience from your point of view?
Well, with their social credit systems and their little, phone apps that turn red or green depending on various things, whether that be their behaviour or their opinions on things, or there's a whole lot of different measures, and I understand it changes from region to region in China. It doesn't sound like it's one big centralised system.
So I understand that what you're saying to me is that you think that the banking system could be used for aspects of political and social control, yeah?
It's being used in that way overseas.
Yeah. You gave the example of Canada, and you're saying that happens in China too, and that's the reason why you don't want to see any move of getting rid of cash in this country and giving people that form of independence. Yeah. All right.
And I don't think it's that unreasonable a kind of a thing to want, is to keep your kind of anonymity with your spending. And, there's all sorts of reasons why you would keep cash. We have got a page on our website that's called cashiscool.co.nz. It's a little campaign that we're working on, right down to things like, there might be a woman in a domestic violence situation, and the only way that she can get out of that is by squirreling away cash, over a period of time to get out of that sort of situation. What do you do if you've got a CBDC system that prevents you from doing that?
Okay, so far I'm not hearing anything that's going to undermine or sabotage the social infrastructure of New Zealand. You're doing therapeutic products bill, and you've got some submissions on that. You're doing keeping an eye on the amendments to the international health regulations of World Health Organization, and you'd like to keep cash as an option for New Zealanders in terms of their financial banking. This doesn't seem like people seeking to overthrow the social order in this country.
We're not a cancer on the democracy of the country, you mean?
You're disappointing me.
More. Maybe the rest of my list might get you in.
Finally, you're going to get into something insurrectionist. Good, let's go.
Well, maybe not. But digital ID is another one that's highly tied into the CBDC kind of situation. So I'm aware that in 2019, Argentina was a bit of a pilot in that space where they implemented a digital ID system that tied together all of your records, so your birth certificates.
I quite like that one. Now, you see, he's arguing with somebody who thinks that's a bloody good idea. That's the whole idea of having a social security number at birth.
Yeah, it may be. And, of course, all of these things clearly have a practical convenience factor.
Yeah.
But when you look at them in conjunction with the other things that are looking to be rolled out, such as the central bank digital currencies and vaccine passports, what we saw happen over in Argentina prior to COVID was that if you wanted to renew your passport or your driver's license, you had to be fully up to date with all of the government recommended vaccine schedule for adults. And so these are the kinds of things that come, these are the risks involved those sorts of
yeah,
systems.
I sort of get what you're saying, but the principles are bloody good. So if I had a number for everything, I think is it the Danish have got it or the Swedes have got it as well? You've got a number for birth, and it's your birth date plus a 4 code, so it's unique to you, and you carry it through from everything. And I think it's a bloody good idea, because I must have 6, 7 different digital identities at the moment, and I can't remember what they are. But if I had one that I could,
Well, then now they catch us, right? Because it's convenient and it's easy, and we like that. Clearly, everybody likes that. But maybe you're not like it when it's tied to your bank account.
Yeah, well, I think you're talking about 2 separate things, though. You're talking about whether or not that's a good idea, so just from pure ease of convenience and stuff like that, through to can it be misapplied, i.e. can the information be misused or misdirected, misappropriated by government or other agencies, yeah? I mean, we've already
seen that it can. Argentina is an example of that, that therefore you can't access, really basic things like your passport or a driver's license, which then can affect your ability to travel and work and all of that kind of thing, if you don't go along with what the latest government kind of decision is on what should be injected into your body.
Yeah,
that's just one example.
I just see those two things as different. But okay, I mean that's all right. That's
what happened over there.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, just because it happened in Argentina, which is hardly a functioning democracy, I'm not suggesting that necessarily that would be the precursor for New Zealand. But okay, that's all right. No, that's all right.
We just have to be aware of it, right? Yeah. Because if you take the Chinese kind of example, Michael, and the government doesn't like what you're saying on your radio show, and then you go and try and buy your loaf of bread down at the dairy, and you find that you've got a red light on your phone, maybe that might not be so nice.
Yeah, we're not China, though.
Yet.
I was just thinking, well, no, I was just thinking, of all the different numbers I've got a national health number, I've got a social security number, I've got a driver's ID number, I've got a registration number for what used to be, I've got so many. It would be quite nice to have one, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that we have to be careful what we agree to, and that it's always presented in the way, in a way that it's going to benefit us. Of course, it's going to be an attractive prospect to a lot of people. It's just that you have to be sure of the devil is always in the detail, and it's all about this sort of top-down control, all-encompassing. We don't want to be in a situation where, basically convenience comes at a cost.
Number 5.
And our government has just been caught out lying about things, so I don't really trust them to
be perfectly honest with you. Yeah, I'll be honest with you on that one. This isn't unique to this government. I mean, governments are often given advice by government departments that they then decide not to take. In this situation with children, I think what is important is why. So why have they prioritised the rollout of the vaccination schedule over the health of our children? And that is what really gets up my nose. And keeping a finger on the pulse of what other people are saying in the space, it's crossed a line, because people don't like to think that their children, I mean, I know so many teenagers who were coerced into taking this. They didn't want to take it, but they wanted to go to the festivals. They really wanted to go back to their year 2 in university. They wanted to get a driver's license. They wanted to go out and socialise with their friends. We were all coerced into it. Let's be honest about this. We were all encouraged and then coerced into the COVID thing. We either did willingly or unwillingly or with half a heart or whatever. I take the point on that. I've always argued that the mandates were wrong. You know that. I didn't argue the vaccination was wrong, but I argued that the mandates were thoroughly wrong. And I hope that's a lesson that we learn in the future. But we can't live on hope, though. I think this is the point that we want to make, is that there has to be some accountability for this. They can't tell us on the one hand that they're making decisions based on scientific evidence and expert advice. They're explicitly saying that, but they're not.
They're not making it.
I
based
never
on
thought
those
that.
things. They were making it.
I always thought they were making political decisions. I mean, I remember the Prime Minister saying that they were making their decisions based upon the expert public health advice. But you'd have to say they departed from that advice about a year ago, didn't they?
Well, they did, but you go to your average person out on the street and see what they think about that. I think that most people believe that the government has their best interests in health at heart.
Yeah, they did.
And maybe that wasn't the case in this situation. And so, do we just sort of throw up our hands and think,
no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that this is properly the responsibility for the Royal Commission to look at and to ask those sorts of questions.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm encouraging you to make those submissions to the Royal Commission. When I mean you, I mean the Voices for Freedom. Because if you don't bring it to the attention...
Yes, it sounds like Claire saying yes, we will.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, good on you. Okay, we've got digital ID. What's the next one you've got? Number 5.
Okay, so there's more, but wait, there's more. So we'll probably be continuing to talk about the climate change agenda, Agenda 2030, smart cities, 15 to 20-minute cities that have been floated as an idea internationally. There's also a few articles floating around that relate to different parts of New Zealand as well. So that's something that we will be continuing to look at, as well as like the farming emissions and all of that kind of stuff. And we will continue to grow and connect our Kiwis through our groups. So we've got all these 100-plus groups around the country, and that is something that's a really big part of what we do. Is providing a place for people to come together and develop that community and get those relationships.
Alia, can I say
of what's happened?
I listened to that now. That's 6. One of the things that cool, brilliant, well done. Go for your life. You're a fair enough lobby group. You've got people supporting you. I've got no problems with that at all, and I don't think the majority of New Zealanders have either. I'll tell you the thing that and I'm just raising with you, and I wonder if you've looked at it as well. When I look at that agenda, there's nothing there that motivates me as passionately as if I was losing my job or having services or products denied to me because of a personal medical choice I've made. In other words, my response to that would be emotional and visceral and active and out there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Voices for Freedom started on, this explosion of resentment at having a part of my individual life controlled by people who I didn't think should have such. I'm looking at those and I'm thinking none of those give me that same emotional, visceral, physiological response. Have you thought of that too?
Mm. Well, yeah, I mean, that's been something that is so huge in the history of this country now that, people carry a lot of trauma from that, and they're still to this day bitter about it, because we've been sort of encouraged to just get on with it now, and it's all dropped now, so what are you worried about? It was wrong. And so people are really, they carry that with them, and they carry the broken trust because, I think of my own parents, and they were a long time. In fact, I think they probably voted Labour their entire lives, and this was what broke them, and it broke their trust. And they are so disgusted in the government about what they did, and so that what that does is it makes them wary about everything else that has come down the pipeline. And so, maybe there isn't anything that we foresee that is at that level coming up, but everything that is coming is still very important.
No, I'm not suggesting that. So, I was just thinking from a practical organisational point of view. Will you find it harder to motivate people on issues that seem a little more prosaic, if you see what I mean? The others affected them completely, and you acted as that lightning rod, if you like, to provide an organisational and a supportive network for people who are directly affected. These seem a bit more, I don't know, tangential. What do you think?
Yes, maybe for the people who weren't directly impacted. I think for our own people, what we hear is these are really huge concerns of theirs, because they don't want to see a 2.0 happening like COVID did, with another reason behind it, whether it be the climate or, these other sorts of reasons that might be a driver for a similar kind of response of lockdowns and restrictions on your life. And so the people who are awake to this kind of thing are very interested in it. And I think our challenge will be to educate the people who are only just starting to wake up on these issues, just to spark their thinking and to get them interested and maybe wanting to investigate further. So that is our role, and we've got another sort of pretty exciting thing that is in the pipeline that we won't be announcing yet, but will be announced in the next wee while. So we're working really hard on that.
That wouldn't be some sort of political organisation, would it?
Not political at this stage.
Well, because
politics is going to be a big part of this year.
Well, it is. I mean, it's the part of this
obviously
year.
Obviously it is.
Yeah, but when you're talking about your mum and dad and saying, they voted Labour all their lives, but they won't now because they don't trust this government, I'm thinking, yeah, but wait on. Who are they going to vote for? Because...
that's a question.
Yeah, well, and then when you look at, you've got basically 4 options, or 5, if you like, that are represented in the House currently. And then you've got one that maybe on the periphery out there is sort of hovering around that 5%. Gee, it's the question I've asked of the whole anti-mandate movement. Unless you coalesce and collide, does this all just be sort of sound and fury signifying nothing? Or do you actually have to organise yourselves so you can get people into Parliament?
Well, that's going to be the challenge of this year, I think, is how it is handled. So, we will have a part in that, no doubt, one way or another.
Well, I take it Voices for Freedom you do want people sympathetic to your ideas in Parliament, yeah?
Well, we want the country, the representatives of the public positions in power. Of course, you can't just have only one kind of way of thinking in politics. This is an example of this particular Cranmer article being ignored by everybody in politics. The opposition, you'd think it would just be an easy kind of ticket for them to pick it up, but they haven't. And so, it does, there are a lot of people who are concerned about this kind of thing, and their voices are not part of the current government
space. Alia,
so that needs to happen.
Listen, we've come to 12 o'clock. It's been a fascinating conversation. Again, I don't think anything there, everybody listening to this, and one of the reasons I had this conversation was the mainstream media will listen to this as well. They're waiting for you to say something wrong. I can't see I can't see anything in the mandate. I might disagree with you on all 6 of those things. It doesn't matter. There's nothing there that I think inherently sabotages New Zealand democracy.
No, we are encouraging people to participate in democracy. That is not what they're trying to make out we are doing. They're trying to make out that we want to upend things and set off a bomb from the inside. That's not what we want to do. We just want to see everybody's opinions represented.
Good on you. And it's lovely to have you on the show. Listen, you'll always have an open ear here. You and I disagree on many things, but one thing we are passionate about is the idea that people should be able to freely express their opinion without fear or favour, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. And so just as we're going, I'd like to encourage people, if they really want to keep across what we're up to, please go over and sign up on our website, voicesforfreedom.co.nz, and you can get our emails and you can find out all the things that we're up to.
From the horse's mouth, not have it interpreted by the mainstream media.
Exactly.
Good on you. Nice to talk to you, Alia.
Thanks,
you have a very good weekend. Okay, thank you very much. Alia Bland, Voices for Freedom. And can I just say, just to encapsulate the end of that, listen, this platform is for everybody.